Hi, I'm Guy Barry with the Optimistic American. I work with Paul Johnson at Redirect Health. I'm the Chief Operating Officer, and we are going to talk about this month's book, The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek. We have a guest joining us, Caleb Malik, who's an Associate Director of Revenue with SmartBug, and he knows all there could be with marketing and sales, so super expert here. And if you like what you hear about The Infinite Game, please like, subscribe, and more importantly, ask questions. If you can ask questions in the comments or let us know what you want to know more about, we're happy to answer those questions and reach out to you to have open dialogue. That's what a book club's all about. So, Paul, let's dive into the book. And when I think of The Infinite Game, I don't know if you or Caleb picked up on this, but he covers a lot of topics. Simon goes into Vietnam, to talking about China and Russia, to capitalism, and then ties it all into business. So I found the book very interesting. What overall, just general concepts, or how did you feel about the book, Paul?
Well, first, I love the idea of the finite game versus the infinite game. The concept that that a person playing a finite game can almost never beat a person playing the infinite game. Although a little later in the show, I'm going to talk about when that's not true and why it matters, or at least why I found that it matters. But the person playing the infinite game is playing a game where there really is no winner and loser. There's just simply the ability to kind of strive for a goal. And oftentimes the person that you're racing against in an infinite game is yourself. In the finite game, you are trying to beat another person. And there are some places where it's just a finite game. If you run for office and you end up in a runoff with two people, it is a finite game. There will be a winner and there will be a loser. But in business, oftentimes business leaders see business as being a finite game, and it's just not. The people who win in business are people who have more of the infinite game mindset. And we'll talk more about what that means.
That's great. And, the piece that I would add when you think of politics and somebody winning a game, it's winning a game right now, but it's also about then position yourself to help push a cause forward. Right?
I advise people all the time who run for office, and I have a mentoring group for people who are aspiring to be in business, and I have a mentoring group for people who want to run for office. And I did that really as a disclosure because I was mentoring too many people individually, and I needed to get them into a group so that I could have time to go back to work because my partners would get mad at me. Yeah. But in politics, I always tell them, hey, you need to have the long view anyway. And the long view is this. You're going to learn something from the campaign. You're going to learn about the community. You're going to learn about politics. You're going to learn how a race works. And it's okay to want to win, and it's okay to put that as a priority. But the bigger priority is to think about what's really your long-term goal. I've seen politics have effects on people that it made them the rest of their lives. They became better people. They became better business people. They were successful because of all the people that they met and they got to know. And I've seen people who devastated their lives because politics turned them into something angry and divisive and a belief that somehow or another they got screwed over.
Yeah. Caleb, what all concepts did you feel, or what did you like about the book?
Yeah, I think you pulled out something important there, which is this idea of the just cause, which, he talks about needing to have a just cause. And so when you talk about the finite game of an election, I think that's he would probably respond with, well, the infinite game, though, is the cause, right? That's the thing that you ultimately were trying to move forward, your initiatives, your policies. And, maybe you do lose the election, but hypothetically, maybe you learn a ton about, like you said, how an election works and different roles within a team that's trying to get somebody elected. And so, maybe you lose and maybe you don't run again in the future, but maybe you take those same skill sets and can use them to support somebody else who's trying to move those sorts of initiatives forward, be a member of that team, and then maybe they win. And then at the end of the day, you are, I guess there's no winners and losers, right? That's the idea of the infinite game. But then you're kind of winning at that moment in the game because you're taking steps to move forward the, that the just cause, as it were. And so that was one of the things that really stood out to me, was identifying your just cause. And I think when he talks through that section and he kind of lays it out, one of the things I really liked was talking about how you can see it in mission statements and how you can see it in the way that it shows up in the order in which people will give their mission statement or talk about the work that they do. And that it is really easy to get lost in, we're going to be the best, we're going to provide the best products, and kind of forgetting that, like, what you're in the business of, which is something I kind of took away from that section of, like, I work for Smart Bug Media. We are a marketing agency, historically digital marketing agency, but really we're in the business of growing businesses, right? That's what we do. And so he gives some examples of what this might look like. But in my context, it's, well, maybe it's not just marketing. Maybe there's these other services we could be offering. Maybe we should be acquiring a company who does outbound sales, because that's an important part of growing a business. And that's really what we're in the business of. So anyway, long story short is the idea of the just cause really, really stood out to me, and tying that into, like, what your mission is and what you're trying to accomplish and who you're helping. Really, really important, and kind of was a through line.
How about you, Guy? What did you think was the most important?
Well, let's start. I'll get to what I see as most important, and I just want to tie this piece of what Caleb said, which is, it starts with the just cause, and then he talks about trusting teams, a worthy rival, existential flexibility, and then the courage to lead. And the all of those pieces together, what sticks to me is you hear about team members or people with a company being excited for where it's headed, the future, whatever, and I'm tied to something better or greater than myself. And I think that when we look at this environment over the last few years, where there's been people job hopping, companies trying to say, I got to pay more money to keep people, companies saying I got to offer more benefits, all this stuff. What I take out of this book is, but if you can find people who want to carry your cause forward, those people will want to stick with your company, and make your company about that, about the cause. It can't be profits first, then what am I going to do with the profits? Oh, I'll try to take care of people, or I'll try to take care of the customer. It starts with, no, I want to have a great cause. Then I want to figure out who are the people that are going to help me put that cause forward. Then I'm going to figure out how do I have money so I can keep that moving forward, right? And those were some of his 3 pillars in the book. So to me, that speaks to, especially what we try to do at Redirect, on if we're going to have a mission around, easy and simple, affordable healthcare for everyone. That is a big mission. It can be a cause that people can get behind.
So I'll go a little philosophical on you. One of my favorite philosophers is Plato. And there's a saying in philosophy that says that all great philosophers are simply a footnote to Plato, meaning he had most of the great ideas first. One of the great ideas that he had was this whole concept of ideals. All right, and ideals, what he said was that the ideal really only exists in the mind. And so he utilized the concept of a triangle. And he said, look, a perfect triangle that has all the corners perfect and the lines that meet all the rules of what a triangle would have to meet exists in your mind. But if you try to draw it up on a wall, you can't get it perfect. Right? The only ideal is in your mind. And so thus he said, the ideal, that what's in your mind, is more real than what you put out into the public. Now, he did this because Aristotle had been on trial because of the teachings that he had been giving people. Plato was obviously his student. Aristotle, when he went on trial, about half of the jury, a very large jury, convicted him of being guilty. And so they asked him, what do you think your penalty should be? And he says, I'll tell you what my penalty should be. I've done so much for Greece. What you guys ought to do is pay me a pension for life. You guys ought to all get up and basically kiss my butt for doing all the great things that I've done for you. Well, he ticked off the rest of the jury and they all sentenced him to death, right? Mm-hmm. What Plato was trying to do by talking about this triangle was to say, okay, there are these concepts that are greater in your mind and they're more real that's in your mind than what exists in our society, right? And he called them forms, and that all forms end up playing up to a logos. But without going too deep into that, The concept was that there are these other concepts like bravery and courage and truth, and that those, while they were an ideal inside of our mind as to how to get to a perfect truth or how to get to the perfection of courage, they nonetheless are every bit as real as what happens in life, and that what you can see and that what you can touch, that courage exists. It's not just a concept that man may have in his mind, that truth exists. It's not just a concept that we have in our mind. And so there he talked about the allegory of the cave. And the allegory of the cave was that deep down inside the cave, all the walls are dark. But at some point, some person goes up towards the top of the cave and light comes in and he begins to see that there are all these beautiful writings and illustrations that are on the wall. And he runs down to try to tell everybody else, but they can't quite get it because they're not yet enlightened. And on the outside was the sun, which was logos that gave light to everything. The point is that we have to strive for an ideal. And when we strive for an ideal, he was saying to the people of Greece, when you killed Aristotle, you knew that he didn't deserve what you gave him. You knew that what you were doing was wrong, right? But you were angered. That was not justice. That was something else. And once you can get people committed to the cause, to being enlightened, your chance of being able to accomplish that ideal dramatically improves. The challenge that I think that we have is, at least what I found in life, business, and politics, is that not everybody buys into the ideal. Not everybody buys into the concept of a greater cause. I can promise you there are people that I have met who spend their entire lives thinking about how to destroy their opposition. And I don't mean just like beat them. I mean destroy them. I remember one time we had a conference with Lee Atwater, which you won't remember, but he ran George Bush's campaign and he ran this ad against Michael Dukakis. It was called the Horton ad. And it was an ad about a guy who had been given a work furlough by Michael Dukakis, who was black and who had raped white women. And we went into this program at Harvard. It was called Off the Record. Lee Atwater died some time back, so I suspect it's not a problem to talk about it today. But it was Lee Atwater and the person who ran Michael Dukakis' campaign. And she said, look, one of the problems I had is when you ran that ad, you were invoking racism, right? And you were stirring up this challenge or this problem, and you furloughed as many people as Michael Dukakis did. And Lee Atwater says, oh, Susan, this wasn't about furloughs and who had done the most furloughs. He said, this was about a black man who had raped a white woman and that you had furloughed them and what that would do inside society. And so Susan became very upset. She said, Lee, there's something you didn't know about me. She said, I was raped by a black man. And the fact that you would do that, I just can't fathom that you would do it. And I'll never forget, he leaned forward with this devilish smile. He says, oh, Susan, I knew that you'd been raped by a black man, and I knew you wouldn't be able to handle it. And that's why I ran the ad. The point is this. There are people out there who play a finite game, and they play it very, very hard. And some of them have no rules and no boundaries. Here's the question. There's only one way you can play against that person. You have to do the exact same thing, only worse. I don't know that it's worth playing.
I was going to say, or choose not to play that game. Choose not to participate in their game.
Right. And then what you decide is, maybe I'm going to lose this round. Maybe I'm not going to be able to win this round. Maybe I'm going to have to move on to something that's greater. I have found that if you want to engage people in a cause, you have to engage them in something that's greater. And long term, I think there are huge benefits that come from that. I also think there's a huge detriment. By the way, Lee Atwater on his deathbed apologized and said, hey, these things that I did in life, they were terrible, and I feel terrible about doing them. At the end of his life, he wasn't really the person that he wanted to be.
Yep. Yeah, and as we continue down that path of just the just cause, he covers a lot of different topics, including he thinks the CEO would be better titled the Chief Vision Officer, that their mission is to be that, and so as we take that idea that the CEO is the chief vision officer, it goes into this next section that then he goes into capitalism. And he brings up from Jefferson to Adams to just how the country was founded to where we are today. And one of the examples he uses is if a CEO has 80% of their bonus tied to stock options, what do they care about? Raising the stock price. Whether it means layoffs, whether it means running the company in the ground, they're going to do anything they can to make that stock price go up. So that's where they're not being the vision officer. Caleb, what all did you see in that, and what would you say? Do you see that in companies where maybe some people at the top are not lined up with moving the company forward? They're more moving a stock price forward or getting their bonus.
Yeah. So there's two pieces of that there. So just to touch briefly on the idea of this like chief vision officer, it had me thinking about my own CEO role, the head of a department, like that sort of thing, right? Where it's like I don't know that in the past as a leader I have been the chief vision officer for the marketing department or for the sales department. So I think it would be really easy for somebody to read that or to hear that and think, okay, well, that's a CEO's job, and then I'm going to just take that, right? But it's like anybody who's in a leadership role, really, it's your job to like paint a vision for where's the company going, right? And that does come from your CEO or CVO, as he would want to call them. But then within your own department, like where are you taking this department? Where are you taking your team, right? And painting that vision. So that was just a bit of a takeaway for me that I think that's been a failing of mine at different points in the past. But to speak to kind of where have I seen this kind of play out in business, the thing that stood out to me, he talked a bit about like venture capital and these sorts of things being a source of, hey, it sounds great to get money for your business and raise money and be able to invest and grow faster. But these companies typically want many, many multiples within 3 to 5 years. And that's how they make their money and how they get their exit. And I do see that a lot where I'll talk to various marketing or sales leaders or even founders, owners, and they have let things just get a little bit out of their hands, right? Because they don't have control of the company anymore, or their owner doesn't have control of the company anymore. And you do see how it impacts their culture when you talk to them. You see how it impacts their goals when you talk to them. People who come to me and say, oh, we got to double our revenue by next year. I've got $10,000 to spend on marketing. I don't have a marketing department. I don't have it's like nobody gave you any tools to do this. They just gave you the pressure to make it happen, which is not really a great environment to have success, right? And maybe you could find a way to be successful, but that additional stress, people generally don't operate or think very well under that. And so you can sometimes look at these people's goals and look at their data and look at where they're at. And it's like, I don't know who had the idea that this was going to be feasible for you to do this. And I feel so sorry for you that your job is to chase this unachievable goal, which of course then makes them think, well, maybe I need to get out while the getting's good and I'll go be a marketing director somewhere else or a CMO somewhere else or whatever, right? You get that turnover, you lose that organizational knowledge, like all of these, like as I read this, I was like, yes, the people I talk to on a regular basis all the time, I was like, everybody needs to be reading this book, it was like, you're putting your people in a position to fail, and then you're wondering why your business isn't doing very well and why you keep losing your top talent.
And even in this book club, and for that matter, the Optimistic American, the bigger vision is that we believe in the human spirit. That if you release the human spirit, that it has the ability to solve most of mankind's problems. Any issue that's been created by man, any problem created by man, can be solved by men, right? Mm-hmm. And so the idea is that if you can release that human spirit and engage it in its ability to be innovative and creative and optimistic and rational, that it can solve big problems. The challenge is that we're confronted all the time with negative information from talk shows and from social media and politicians, and for that matter, political parties, right? Why? Well, they know that there's a negative bias, and that if they can terrify you, it engages the amygdala hijack, and that literally hijacks your neocortex and your ability to be able to be creative and optimistic and think rationally. Well, what we believe is that there's an urgency into telling leaders, business leaders, political leaders, partisan leaders, new media leaders, that there's an urgency to optimism, because through optimism you gain agency, and through agency you gain this empowerment of the human spirit that gives us the ability to solve our problems. So the books that we pick fit within that. I can tell you it is very, very tempting constantly to take the negative edge. And there are a lot of ways to go after the negative side. Why? Well, because you'll increase the amount of subscribers that you have, because when people are terrified, they'll push that subscribe button because they want to see more tomorrow. Our goal, the goal of his book that we just got done reading, the other books that we've had on our list, they're all about empowerment. They're all about how do you regain your sense of agency. And what I love about the 5 items that you talked about is that all of them are about how do you do that. It helps us accomplish our goal by taking a look at what it is that he's proposed, Simon's proposed, as being part of those solutions.
Yeah. And what I enjoy examples when I read a book. So I loved he goes into more depths with his example of Apple versus Microsoft, and he brings up that the Zune was better than the iPod, which I actually had bought a Zune, and I would have said the same thing. I thought the Zune was actually a really nice device, and then it was gone with like blink of an eye, and it was all about winning, right? They wanted to win and be the next, the next device, the best digital music player. When Apple was going, how do we make the iPod irrelevant so that it's gone? Like, what's the next thing that we need to be thinking of? And they're creating the iPhone, right? So they were constantly just challenging themselves, where Microsoft was trying to beat Apple, and you saw that. And that was one great example. There was another one that he talked about being at a coffee place in a Four Seasons, and he talks about that. He asked the guy, "Hey, tell me about," and he just talked about how he loved working there. Like, it was a great place to work, and how every single manager that came by would say, "What else do you need? How can I help you?" And just everybody was supportive, and they'd created this environment where this person loved being there. And I got to thinking, how many people have you interacted with where they're working somewhere, but you can tell they're not happy. They're just doing it to collect a paycheck. What advice do you give to that person who's out there doing that? I don't know, Paul, what would...
All of us should recognize the importance of providing value to a company. There's a formula called the Pareto formula, which is based upon the idea that that half of the work done inside of a company is done by the square root of the amount of people that are working in it. So think about this number. If you have 9 people, 3 people are doing half the work, right? But if you have 1,000 people, 100 people are doing half of the work. What that does is it tells us that there's a great ability to improve our efficiency inside of any company, that it always exists, or any organization for that matter. That if you start looking at the people who are really working and the people who aren't working nearly as hard, that if you can improve the efficiency of those people who aren't working as hard, you can dramatically change the outcome of what the company is trying to accomplish. Now, the challenge is, how do you do that? How do you get that other very large portion to be able to want to participate? And this is what I found. If you make it about money and how much they're getting paid, and what benefits that they have, you're going to fail. Now, there's also a standard that I call the hygiene standard. If you're so low that you stink, right, you're not going to get people to work for you. So you can't be ridiculous about it. But that's the wrong thing to chase. The right thing to chase is, what's the goal that we're all trying to accomplish? How are we trying to make the world better? And how am I empowering you, giving you the ability to be able to actually be engaged and to make a difference on this issue so that it's not all about me? And if you can do that, which, by the way, that takes a lot of work to just accomplish what I've just said. If you can do that, what you find is that the bad players, they leave on their own, right? And if the answer is, well, I'm leaving because you don't pay enough, that's the right person to get rid of, right? That's the person who wasn't bought in to the overall cause. But I think, again, you have to start with a recognition of, hey, you're trying to improve the output of what ends up being a majority of your company so that you can increase your efficiency. If that rule is right, that 100 out of 1,000 people are doing half of the work, if you can just engage another 100, you've completely doubled the output of the company.
I mean, I find it very hard as a leader in business that when somebody says, I want more money, or hey, have you noticed what I could get elsewhere? That is such a challenge, because when you go through those three pillars of, I want to advance a cause, I want to take care of people, and I also want to make sure we have money to be able to do all those previous two things, that's a balance. You're constantly balancing. I got to be able to pay people great, and I want them to be taken care of. I want them to be able to take care of themselves and their families, but I also have to be able to have money to help push the cause forward and help take care of people. And, if we could just give everybody what they want, at some point we stop being able to operate, unfortunately. And that is such a challenge. I don't know, Caleb, have you come across that?
Yeah, it is really challenging. I'm sitting here jealous of you both working in healthcare, because I feel like there's always like an obvious, and that was one of my kind of notes, because I have a bit of a background there, where having done some work in healthcare, it's like it's in a lot of ways, your kind of just cause is a little bit clear to you, or much clearer to you than like something like I work for a marketing agency. We do a lot of work with B2B brands. We do a lot of work with technology companies and software companies. And I've personally struggled with feeling like I like my coworkers, I like my work, I like my, leadership. At the end of the day, though, I'm helping like software companies sell software to other software companies who are probably owned by a VC firm, so that they can grow more. It's like finding that, like, what is the just cause is a little bit more difficult, I think, in some environments, and that are maybe a little bit more money and less purpose driven at times. So I don't have a great answer, I don't think, to that one, other than to say I really struggle with it myself, because it's like, even if you find the work interesting, it can feel a little bit like, is this the best use of my skill set for the world and for improving, improving the world, I guess. So I don't know. Maybe you have advice for ways to get around that. We've definitely tried to be more giving and things like that, from the work that gets done and that we make a living off of. But I do find it hard sometimes to get tied into that. And I've worked most recently leading salespeople, and it's, hey, you're selling stuff, right? You're selling services, you're selling, you might be helping sell software for some of our partners. And it can be a little bit hard to feel like, man, like we're not curing cancer here. That can be difficult, right? Especially when things get hard, which being a salesperson is a very hard job, right? Emotionally. And so you can go through those tough days and then feel like, not only am I dealing with these difficult emotions around losing a deal or this, that, or whatever, but I also, what is this tied to in terms of a higher purpose? And that's not on my organization. I think that's just kind of the nature of the role. In some roles, like, you really have to be looking for it and be conscious about it. And so that's why I like, Guy, you in the beginning talked about your, being focused on being grateful and being focused on being like mindful and present, which I think is really not something a lot of people focus on.
So, our company actually has more similarities to yours than you may imagine. So in healthcare, there's a difference between the purchaser and the user, right? The purchaser is the business, generally, at least in our case. It's almost all businesses. The user is the consumer, the patient who's coming in. So here's traditionally what happens in the healthcare field. The user goes to the doctor, and the doctor tells the user, hey, I'm on your side, and that employer and insurance company are trying to screw you, right? That's what's going on. And then the insurance company, they tell the purchaser, they go, oh my God, these employees and these doctors, what they're doing is they're running up your cost, and now you've got double-digit inflationary rates on your insurance costs, and I'm trying to protect you from them. Of course, if you ask them to see the numbers, they won't give it to you. They have no desire to let you know what's really going on. So you have these two groups that are pitting the purchaser and the user against one another, right? Now, from our standpoint, what are we trying to do? Well, let's start with the employer. What the employer has a problem of, or a challenge of, is they want to go focus on their core business. And healthcare really isn't the core portion of their business, but they have to focus on it because the increases are so big that what they're doing is they're putting into place plans that only a small portion of their employees can afford. And so now the rest of their employees don't have it, which leads to resentment, leads to them looking for other jobs. It makes it harder for them to be able to recruit. But just as importantly, they start cheating, right? Maybe they cheat the system by going into a hospital and saying, I need to get my cold for my child checked up on, knowing that they're not ever going to have to pay the bill. Or maybe they utilize workers' comp, driving up what's called an experiential rate. We want to make it easy for the employer, right? So that they can go back to their core business. Why? Because we believe in capitalism. we believe that if we allow that entrepreneur to go focus on the things that they're good at, that they're going to make monumental differences in each one of their areas. But we have to do our part well for them. And part of that is trying to find some place where the user and the purchaser begin to understand one another's needs and how they interrelate. And that if you abuse the healthcare system, you're really just abusing your employer, who then abuses you back by not paying you a higher wage. Mm-hmm. It's all interconnected, right? I would make this guess. The exact same thing is true in a different way in marketing. Right? The people that you're trying to help, that you're trying to work with, are people who, marketing is one of the hardest areas to understand. I know that it's supposed to be a science, but I keep seeing it as more of an art, right? That there's this art to making it work. And people say, well, all you need to do is A, B, and C, and we go do A, B, and C, and it doesn't work, right? It's like, well, yeah, that's A, B, and C if you were that kind of company, but we weren't thinking about the type of company you were. You need D, E, and F. Right? Yep. And somewhere along the road, you start using A, F, and Z. Mm-hmm. But what do you need? Somebody with experience who understands what the problems are and the fact that businesses are extremely annoyed by trying to figure out what works and why their Google ratings aren't giving them what they want and why their Facebook ads that they thought were going to fix the problem don't work and why it is that their salespeople aren't delivering what they need to sell and how is sales actually connected to marketing in the first place. Those businesses, what we've done in the United States and that changed the world is that we empowered the individual over our government. And those individuals are out resolving thousands of different types of problems in everything from how do we create a driverless car, how do we build a home for you, to how do we extend human life. You provide a service for them, and giving them the ability to go do their service is in concert with them changing the world. And again, we're in healthcare. Why do we need to change the world in healthcare? Because what's going on in healthcare is stopping entrepreneurs from really being able to go out and fix the other problems that exist. Yeah.
Well, and I would say for people who are in a role where they feel, I don't know what the cause is that I'm advancing, meaning I could be in an accounting role, I could be in a sales role, I could be a front desk person. You could find yourself in some type of position where you go, I don't know how I'm having a positive effect or advancing a cause. What I would say to those people is you can only focus on what you control, right? So I can control the interactions I have with the people I work around. I can control my interactions with my family, my friends, what I do in the community. Those are things I can control. And I can use maybe the income or the network I'm building at a company, all those things for a good purpose. That's the cause you can advance. You can advance, how am I having an effect on my community? How am I having an effect on the people around me? And I think we take for granted the interactions we have with people and the effect they can have on them. Meaning if I have a positive, I'm smiling, I'm having a good time, and that then goes to somebody else, and then they take that home and they have a positive interaction with their family, I just made a difference. Mm-hmm. And all I did was just create a different attitude for that person. So I think that you can be in any position and find a good cause to get around. It doesn't have to just always be that company.
In his book, he used the example of the flight attendant who is standing collecting tickets, and somebody shows up in line and they've got they have the B and they should have had the A, and she yells at him and says, you came up at the wrong time, right? And then when he asked her why, she said, well, I've got to enforce the rules. Oh my gosh, do we know that in healthcare, right? We know that in healthcare that we have all these frontline workers who are talking to customers every single day trying to resolve problems. And probably 80% of them are standard problems. But there's that 20% that is unique, that no one has really dealt with in the past, because healthcare is evolving and changing all the time. New drugs, new scripts, new rules, the insurance industries are changing. Having somebody on that front line who can be creative is important. Well, how do you get that? I can tell you this. You don't get it by punishing them. Yeah. You don't get it by driving into them all the things that they're doing wrong in a given day. You do that by empowering them and inspiring them and then making them buy into a greater cause. You may talk about, like, what are our core values and how do those core values play into that?
I was actually just going to piggyback off that for a moment, because one of the things that he talks about is, I believe it was the Ford Motor Company. And when the new CEO came in, basically, he really had to push people to tell him what was wrong, right? Everybody showed up to this meeting. They always had everything marked as green. Everything's going great. And he's like, well, we're losing tons of money. Obviously, not everything's working. So stop coming here and telling me that. And it was kind of reflective of experiences I've had in my own role as part of a a revenue leadership team, and being in that meeting and having our CRO say, this, remember, we're in this meeting, and always, but especially in this meeting, we are one team, right? And that means that Nikki's problems are not marketing problems. They are this team's problems, right? And we need to work at that together on that as a team. And so really taking that problem focused and like solution focused approach to working with your team members as a business, and saying like, okay, like we all are business leaders. We all know things about how this business functions. And so you should be able to bring those problems to this conversation and get help from your peers, which is a big part of he talked a lot about like building trusting teams. And so I've seen that play out in my own world, where it's like, yeah, this is an issue that I'm having this week with whatever thing related to sales. Let's have a conversation about that. I could really use your help. You've all been in leadership roles before. What would your recommendation be, right? And being able to work together as a team. So, when you talk about, you don't get the best out of people by punishing them. It just makes me think of my own world and one of the stories that he gave there in that respect.
Well, and he gave a great example on that topic with a chief of police who he's taken over in a department, and there's an officer who the rest of the team is just, they're not being nice to him, in so many words. They're not treating him well. They're not respecting him. They don't trust this officer. And he comes in, and the first thing he realizes, I think it's the culture that's been created here. And so versus just letting this officer go, who's underperforming by all aspects, he says, gives him direct feedback, and then says, take 3 days leave, think about it, and I want to see, I know you can do better. And this was the first time that a leader really had a candid conversation with this officer, but also pushed him to look at it differently. And right off the bat, he thought, okay, this guy, I trust this, this chief of police because he's being frank with me. He's given me a second shot. He didn't just push me to the curb. And now, fast forward, the culture's better at this precinct, and the officer is now one of the top performing officers, and he helps train other officers. And just how many times in business have we just let somebody go, or somebody loses a job because of the culture, the environment that was created a low producing person? And if we just looked at the environment and the culture, that person might have thrived. Mm-hmm. And so that to me was a big one on the trusting teams. I want to go to an example of the existential flexibility that he touches, and when he goes into this, he calls it the existential flex, where the owner he uses an example where Walt Disney left the organization to start Disneyland, put all his money into it. Put everything into it because he had a vision of what he wanted to push forward, and Disneyland was that next thing. Ultimately, he obviously comes back to Disney and helping run the whole organization, but that was something where he saw something that was so important, he was willing to give up everything for it. And then he gives an example on the other side where Kodak creates the digital camera.
Eastman.
And when they create that digital camera, they push it aside because that would then get rid of film and get rid of everything else they do in their business. And like, well, we can't do that. That'll get rid of what we do. Mm-hmm. So they push it aside, and then somebody else comes to the market with digital cameras and takes them out. So when you look at, I'm going to jump to a topic that's not in the book, but when you look at AI and in companies, my guess is if people are not, if companies are right now holding on to something and saying that, no, this is too crucial, and they're not looking at what they could be tapping into AI or tapping into other things, they're going to get left behind. This is a time when they could use other resources, other things to potentially do that existential flex. Be willing to go, our cause is so great, I'm willing to get rid of what I've built and go jump on this. What do you think about that?
Well, first, I love the Kodak example. I like the early part of the Kodak example even better, which was Eastman had this idea that he wanted to create a product that the average person could use. Mm-hmm. But there were commercial users in the beginning, and when he produced this film that you could put inside of a camera, was self-contained, and it would take pictures, they said, it's too grainy. It's not good enough. And his answer was, I'm not really doing this for you. Now, that sounds easy, but he had to go create a whole new market.
Right.
And the market didn't exist, right? And he just believed that it would exist by staying true to that cause. Where they finally messed up was they lost the importance of that cause. They instead of thinking about, hey, who's the consumer that we're trying to serve, they started thinking about what's the type of product we're trying to preserve, right? Because we own it, because we're the ones that are behind it. You will be left in the dustbins of history if you do that. Now, the question was, I'm sorry.
Well, the question is just, when you say AI right now.
Oh, AI. So this is my opinion. First, when you look at technology, we're watching a lot of conversation because of ChatGPT in terms of all the jobs that are going to be out of work and the effect that it's going to have on society. No doubt it's going to have a big effect on society. What I have found is over and over again, we have this belief that technology is going to put us out of a job, and it doesn't. I think about the farmer. Imagine the combine. When the combine was first created, that farmer who used it had to know, oh my God, we're going to put thousands of hand workers out of business. Now, in China today, 1 in 3 workers work in agriculture, and they're the largest importer of agriculture in the world. In the United States, less than 1% of our population is in agriculture, and we're the largest exporter. We created more wealth. We created higher efficiency. That efficiency, those people went on to other jobs. Who would have known if you were that farmer that they were going to have televisions and radio sets and all these other things that you were going to be able to work on in cars, right? Yep. So I look at ChatGPT, and I'm just watching in my office as they start to use it, not just our healthcare company, but in the optimistic American. You still need a person to say, well, what's the question? Well, what's the thing that we're trying to resolve? And you darn sure better, at least at this point, review it, because they can come up with a lot of crazy things that it says to do. But it helps improve it, and it helps make it more efficient, and it helps make it better. Actually, here's what I think is going to happen with ChatGPT. Mediocre organizations who are doing really bad content and writings for their website and for their company are going to get a lot better, a lot better. It's going to move them up in the game. And the challenge is going to be for the better companies who are going to go, okay, wow, they're doing a really good job at this other level. And we've got some of the highest paid people, and we're not getting much better results. I don't think it puts people out of work. I think it ends up focusing them on how to be more creative and what are the new opportunities for it. I also think, like the farmer with the combine, you might have wanted to have stopped it. Good luck.
Yeah.
All right. Just good luck. He had no chance of stopping those combines, the better types of tractors. They were going to happen. What he needed to do is to figure out how to benefit from it. And the workers needed to be benefited as well. And how do they end up being benefited? Education, training, taking on different types of jobs. And I have to tell you, thank God, because my dad was a farmer rancher. I don't want my kids working in that field. That's really, really hard work, even with the combine.
Yep.
All right. So I guess the point that I'm giving to you is, yeah, a lot of the menial jobs are going to become more challenging. It's going to focus us on having to be better trained and better equipped. But I think in the end, all that happens is we create a better ability for the smaller companies to become more competitive with the larger ones.
Yeah. Caleb, what's your thoughts on the existential flex?
Oh man, existential flex. Okay, I thought you were going to get me started on AI, which I could talk about all day, because that's conquering the world that I live in right now. But yeah, the existential flex. I mean, he does talk about this, and I'm kind of curious your thoughts. Like, how much flex is too much flex, and shiny object syndrome, and he touches on that, and so it's like, how, I got 2 business people here who know a lot more than I do. When do you know the moment that it's an existential flex, not shiny object syndrome? Because there's all sorts of things that, goes back to like, what are we in the business of? And he talks about how book businesses could have said, well, we're in the information, distribution business, and therefore they could have been the next Amazon, but they let themselves get disrupted. So I could say, I work with my wife on, she's got a telehealth, does speech pathology, has a clinic. And I could say, well, we're in the business of helping people communicate more effectively, right? let me go start a training program for emotional intelligence for 8-year-olds. Maybe a good idea. I don't know. I'm not sure. But you could flex to that, right? Like that's part of the bigger picture. And I think there's something happening here. We could sell this into schools. Schools are really getting into teaching emotional intelligence. There's a business idea, right? And all of a sudden I've taken us completely off track on what the business really the core is. Maybe it's a good idea. Maybe it's not a good idea. But how do you know? I guess so. To flip the question back to you, like, what are the signs to you that you
Think
need to
about
make that?
this. Think about this question. Think of all those complexities that you're talking about, and then think about, wow, how do we resolve that? Imagine government doing that. Imagine government coming in and saying, we're going to figure out which one of these things that we need to do and which way we need to go, right? The idea that Mao and the Communist Party in China is telling us state-run government or state-run business is a much better process. When you look at that very problem, you have to say, not a chance, right? What's the best way to deal with it? Well, there are 50 businesses doing what you do, 100 businesses doing what you do. And everybody's looking for the niche, right? We're looking for the niche.
Yep.
So I love the company that the guy had gone into being in pest control. And he couldn't sell it. He couldn't get more than a couple of trucks. And then he decided one day, you know what? All my customers are telling me they want me to control mosquitoes. He said, but it's really hard to control mosquitoes. But he took his pest control business and focused on mosquitoes. And he became a major business worth tens of millions of dollars, right? Because he played to that niche. What did that niche do? Solved the problem that customers wanted solved. You're going to go figure out, hey, do they want me to be involved in emotional intelligence? I can't tell you the answer to that. I can tell you there's going to be somebody that tests it. There's going to be somebody that goes into it. Some are going to fail. Some are going to succeed, which is why it shouldn't be government doing it, and why the big companies aren't going to do it, because the big company is still Kodak going, man, we got to protect the status quo. And there's some small woman or some small company with a male or female that's in charge of it that goes, I don't know, I'm going to go give this a shot. And in the process, we keep making improvements. It keeps getting better. When do you do it? You test it. You look at it. And can you do too much and have shiny objects? Oh my God, if that's been a problem in this company once, it's been a problem in this company
I don't know what you're talking about.
I know. We do it all the time, right? Of course, that happens, right? And then you go, wait a minute, who's the customer that we're trying to serve? And somebody ring the alarm bell, because we've got some customers who have some needs right now that are mad at us for not doing what we need to do. And maybe we need to focus less on the shiny object and go back and take care of what it is that they want. And then every now and then the shiny object works. It actually provides a benefit. It's a process of testing, and you're testing because you're trying to get bigger. You're trying to beat the competition. And in trying to beat the competition, you're trying to service a group of customers who aren't served. There are only 3 types of customers. There's the customers who's overserved, right? They bought an Excel spreadsheet and they didn't need all the stuff that was in it. All they needed was the ability to put the data in. There's the customer who's served, right? The customer that the Excel spreadsheet works perfectly for. And then there's the person who has nothing, who just simply can't afford what it is that you're providing. The challenge of the single greatest cause that we can go focus on is, how do we get to that underserved customer? That customer who has a greater need, that would pay something, but they can't pay as much as what the market wants. And that gives them access to the same level of services so they can go do the thing that they do and improve upon it. If we keep focusing lower, this right here, this cell phone, what it's done to empower people all around the globe to be involved not only in talking to people, but engaging in business. It's amazing. It's helped an underserved customer, an underserved business person have access to something that they couldn't even think about 20 years ago. So test and look and make certain that when you're doing a test, you figure out that somebody will buy it, and make certain that you don't put everything you have into that one test. But I think that testing is an important part of figuring it out, and in dealing with the greatest social cause that we have, which is empowering people who today have no power.
Yeah. It's one of the things you said in there. You just said it again. Test, right? Test, and you said, "I don't know. We're going to go try it." And that was one of the things that he brought up several times throughout the book. And I think it kind of best is culminated in that idea of, what does he call it? Courage to lead, right? Which is, and he even says this, he has a story early on where the person says, I don't know, but we're going to have to try, right? And I think it was that seed story about the seed vault. And that to me, I found to be pretty inspirational throughout, to just kind of hear from all of these various stories and from him, directly, and now from you, uh, it's because it's an infinite game. There isn't a determined outcome. There isn't a determined way of doing things. And I think that can be really difficult when you're working in business to say, well, it feels like there should just be a right way of doing things. I've said this to people. Sometimes I struggle with doing work like this because it's not prescriptive, right? Again, my background was a little bit more in healthcare. So I'm like, okay, cool. Like maybe you memorize kind of, okay, when I see this, we do this. That's the best course of action. It might work. It might not. But you don't just decide you're going to test if you're like a doctor in a hospital, right? That's not your job, right? Maybe not all, maybe in some cases. But so being in a world where it's like, do whatever you want, just do it ethically, grow revenue, right? And it's like, whoa, that opens up a lot of opportunities. Better not screw this up, right? And so I've run into that in my own career of like shying away from taking things on, or maybe not putting like my whole into like some side projects and personal projects that I've had, because it's like the uncertainty can freeze you a little bit. So anyway,
the single biggest thing that keeps competent individuals from going into business is fear. They're afraid. They're afraid to try. They're afraid to test, right? And they're afraid of failure. I was always fortunate, right? I grew up in Sunny Slope, Arizona. We lived in very, very small houses and trailers, and people played music in the backyard. And I've always assumed the worst that could happen to me is you send me back to the trailer park, right? It's not that terrible a thing. Don't miss life on the way there. And what I love about business is it gives you a way to experience life. Now, there are lots of ways to be in business. One is start your own company, but another way is what you guys are doing, which is to be engaged in a company at a high enough level that if you want to have an impact, you can. But put away your fear, right? That doesn't mean put away your rationality, right? You have to be rational, and you have to look at it. You have to try to think about what can work. And then when you do something, don't do it in such a way that you risk the whole thing, but take risks and test things and try to figure out whether or not they work. And if you do that enough, you will continue to find progress.
Yeah, and to that question of how do you know it's shiny object syndrome or something else, what I would say is it's the person who's driving, the entrepreneur, the owner. They're going to be the difference in that. Meaning, if the entrepreneur, the owner, or the business person is chasing different things that they know I am going to fail, like they have in their head, they know there's going to be failure, and they're excited to just learn from that journey. Those are the ones that are going to keep pushing things forward. It's the other one that goes, no, this is the next thing to make me money, and they're just jumping to it, right? And so you gotta find there is a balance of finding the right person who gets that there's going to be lots of things to help them move their cause forward, move other things forward, but they're okay to fail because they know that learning, it's that key piece, is going to be what sets it apart.
That is a great distinction to talk about the tension that should exist in your organization, and that if that tension becomes lopsided, you're in trouble. So the desire to risk things and to test is an important aspect, and you drive the operations people nuts, right? And if you drive them too nuts, where they just can't get a handle on being able to service the customer,
they just get a
you
therapist.
fail, right?
Yeah,
get a therapist. Okay. The reverse of it is, if the operations person controls it and nobody's willing to test, you're going to die as well. It's the balance between those two concepts that makes for a successful organization, which is why I like partnerships, right? And that's why I like having a variety of different people engaged in a C-suite or involved in a company, because everybody brings something to the table. If any two people think exactly alike, one of them's not needed. And I believe that in everything from democracy to running a company. You need people who think differently. But that thinking differently creates friction. And that friction sometimes feels really uncomfortable or distasteful, but it's necessary.
Yeah. So we'll start to come to the end today, and I want to touch on something here as we start to close up. So one, he does mention the worthy rival, and I want to use that key word to make sure people understand that it's not about competition, right? Or who's your competitor, or I got to beat this person. He's like, who's the rival that pushes you? And he uses an example in the book that even with the U.S., that it could have been the USSR, and that we felt like we beat them, and so once we beat them, we didn't have a rival anymore, and we start to lose ground, and now China or other places start to go up because we don't feel like we have a rival. And so that's a key piece, that key distinction of a rival. But I'm going to hop over to courage to lead, and Caleb, you'd mentioned that earlier, and he uses an example in the book of CVS and Walgreens and talks about how CVS makes the determination to get rid of cigarettes in their facilities, and that Walgreens has not made the change. And then if you go and you read the mission statement or the values of Walgreens, it doesn't necessarily fit with potentially what they might be doing with cigarettes. And that leads me into the thinking of when it's courage to lead, where do you find or how do you find the right way to speak up and or not speak up when you see that? So like in a company, if you're not the owner, you know if you're not the owner of Walgreens, how do you speak up to say, hey, I don't believe in what we're doing here? How do you find that? Like, what do you do in a company? Where do you find your voice, I guess?
So let me try to address this from both sides. Let me try to address it from a co-owner standpoint, and let me try to address it from a somebody who's working at the executive or management level. First, if you're dealing with this from the from an owner level, you have to be really careful. Look, owners who do startups or who create companies are usually pretty passionate people. And the ones that I've met that have been successful, they are cause-oriented. They are driving towards a cause. And they so much believe in that cause that they become headstrong. And when they become headstrong, they want what they want, right? All those traits happen. But they're also usually smart enough to know, yeah, and as I'm being headstrong, I'm not engaging people and I'm not getting the most out of people and I need to get more from them. And how do I do that? And so they have to balance their own personality, right? And it's not easy. It's a constant battle where, and if you watch people who have founded companies, oftentimes people who founded companies aren't the same people who take them public or run the company after they're public because there's a different mindset. But you can also look back at that and say, wow, had Apple not have gotten the founder back into it, Steve Jobs, they probably would have failed. Right? So the founder can play an important role in driving change inside of a company. Again, the key to the owner is if I want to get the most out of my people, I have to create an environment where they can participate and where they can give. Right? Now let's go to the other side, to the manager and to the executive person. If you're afraid, what that really means is that you have a lack of confidence in the value that you provide. Meaning, if I speak up, I'm going to get my head chopped off by the owner. Well, if you're really going to get fired because you spoke up, you're probably not in the right company to begin with, right? You probably are in the wrong place. And if your answer is, well, I don't think I can get a job that pays as well, man, your value system is messed up because here's what you're really doing. You're saying, I'm willing to take my entire life and to put it into the control of someone who I don't like, I don't enjoy working with, I can't speak up, I have no control over my own destiny and no ability to make certain that this company works. But I think, like a cockroach, I can just weave through this well enough that I survive, right? I don't know. I don't want to live the existence of a cockroach. No way. What I would tell you is that I find that when people do speak up, if you're not afraid, part of not being afraid is to know, hey, I'm talking to a person who's passionate. They may get passionate back on this one. That doesn't mean that they're going to chop your head off. It just means that they're passionate people and that that's how they see things and they get excited about it. So in a friendly way, get excited back.
Yep.
Right? And you may have to find a way to engage their ego a little bit to listen to you. But whatever you do not walk away from that challenge because you're not going to help the company doing it. More importantly, you're going to make yourself miserable. And then on that Pareto example, you're that part of that other group who's not really performing, who's not really providing.
Yeah, you're just floating.
Mm-hmm.
Caleb, any last thoughts and maybe around Courage to Lead or anything else you want to talk about or didn't get discussed in the book?
Yeah, I think to think of it from the level that I'm at, rather than the leader of the organization. I always take the approach of concerns and solutions. So, hey, you've asked me to do this. Not even talking about ethical things. So it just might be things about the business that I might do it differently. And I just approach it from, hey, happy to do it. I know it's not my call. However, here are the concerns that I have about approaching things in this way. Here are the risks. Here's an alternative option, right? And I think when you can bring it to the table in a professional manner like that versus, hey, I'm just getting so passionate and not actually being a productive member of the team, that's a different conversation, right? But if you're approaching it in that way, I think unless you're in a really toxic organization, most people are not going to look at you and say, well, you're fired. Thanks for your disagreement. You're fired, right? And I I think it's harder when I think of the people in positions where it's like, hey, not everybody has savings in place. Not everybody has two people in their house working, right? It takes a lot more. It takes a lot more to say, I don't think this is ethical. I'm going to, give up on this when you maybe have multiple kids at home and, you're the only one bringing home the money and maybe you don't have a huge savings. I still think it's the right thing to do, right? Like we should still operate in ethical ways. And we do see that, right? There are stories in that book, Wells Fargo, for example. And if you do any looking into and any reading about Wells Fargo and everything that happened with that, there was definitely folks who were, your tellers and folks like that who probably were not in a position to be saying this is unethical, I disagree with it, who were whistleblowers and who did end up losing their jobs. And so I think there's a reason it's courage, right? If you have $1 million in the bank, it's not super courageous to say I don't agree with what you're doing. It's more courageous when you're in a position of I'm having to put something at risk here. So I think that there's a lot of people who aren't going to do that, but it was a really important part of this book, I think, in terms of.
Let me respond to that just a little bit if I can.
Yeah.
So the first thing I would say to at least millennials is this isn't only a great job market. This next decade is going to be the greatest job market of any generation in American history, certainly any since I've been alive. There are a lot of opportunities. Now, sometimes when you think that something's going wrong at the upper level and you go, I'm going to quit because of that, you didn't help yourself and you didn't help them. It would have been better to have spoken up because maybe you would have learned something from it. Maybe what you would have learned is this person isn't going to listen. Maybe what you would have learned from it is, oh, there's a reason for why that's happening. Maybe you would have learned, wow, they actually took the input. I remember when I was mayor, I had a bar once that was in one of our big projects that ended up having an issue, and I was going to call the city manager, but I just called the police officer and I said, hey, can you tell me what's going on with this bar? They called me, the company, the Rouse company had called me, and they just wanted to know what was going on. Now, my assumption was he was just going to say, oh, well, they did this wrong or that wrong, and I was just going to call him back and tell him. But what really happened was this. The police officer became terrified. He thought that I was trying to influence him, and he immediately began that there was some type of corruption. Obviously, I must have gotten a check, and the whole thing got blown up internally. Now, it never became an issue, right? Because the city manager came to me and said, did you do this? I said, yeah. Why'd you do it? I told him. He goes, I want you to know the problem you created. I was like, what? And he goes, bad news. You're a politician. That's how they see you. You're not the one to solve the problem, right? You need to follow the process, right? He brought in the officer. The officer was kind of sheepish, and I asked him, I said, how did you feel? And he told me exactly what I just said. And I said, I'm really sorry. All right. And I hope if any politician does that to you again, that you'll tell them, hey, this is inappropriate. Here's why it's inappropriate, because that's not the process that I'm supposed to follow. My point to you is just because they're the CEO or the co-founder, that doesn't mean they know. We fake it like we know, right? Because we have to. We're trying to figure out how to fix 1,000 problems. And we know that if we create an image that we don't really know something, that people go, why am I going to follow him? He has no idea what he's doing, right? Sometimes it's important that people speak up. And sometimes a smart founder or co-founder will say, explain that to me. What's going on? What am I missing? I find that a couple of the best questions that someone can ask at the manager, director level is, hey, what's the most important thing that I can do to add value to the company? What's the most important thing that I can do to help you be successful at the role you're playing? Wow, what a reversal. All of a sudden you're in the top level and you've got somebody at the lower level trying to ask you what it is that they can do to help you be more successful at what you're trying to get done. And I can tell you, it can be a stumping question. You may not actually have an answer for them in the beginning. But the fact that you know that they're thinking about it and that they care about it and that they care about the mission of the company, there are a lot of smart people. I don't want the person who has the most up here. I want the person who has the most in here, that they believe in the cause. Because if they believe in the cause, with mediocre intelligence, we can get through this. We can figure out how to solve the problem. But with the brightest people who really don't buy into the cause, how can I trust that they're coming up with the answer that I care about, right? there's an engagement level that you can engage in with people who are above you that is still respectful and that helps you kind of get through your process. And again, the reason I'm telling you, don't worry about the risk. You're in the greatest job market that we're going to see ever. Now, that doesn't mean we won't have a recession. There'll be a downturn. And when the recession happens, you're going to think it's going to last forever. And it won't, right? It'll be a dip and it'll come back even stronger. Why? Well, that's easy. Because we have a lot more demand with millennials coming into the market. Massive generation. We have a lot more demand than we have supply. And the only way we can fix that supply is to just about double our industrial output. And that's going to mean we're going to have a lot more jobs than we're going to have available people. If there was ever a great time to take a risk, it's now.
With everything you just said, the most important thing was that when you said mediocre intelligence, you pointed towards Caleb. So I just want to make sure that
so I didn't get confused.
Yeah,
on
I didn't get
on the camera.
Listen,
pointing.
we all know the stakes here, all right? We know how the table's set up.
Believe me, I've gotten to 63 with mediocre intelligence, so I'm happy with it.
So we're going to close up today's session, and I want to end on just my final thoughts of what the infinite game means and speaks to with me. And there's this concept that I have in my head that we're really just a drop of water in a river of time. Thousands upon thousands of years. We can influence maybe the drops of water around us, but ultimately we're creating pathways way down the river that we can't foresee. And in this concept, in this book, it's not just about business, but how you live in your life and how you move forward is that I'm going to do whatever I can to advance society, people, human beings, so that this can all continue far after I'm here. And he puts in the book the example of your gravestone's not going to say, you were the best at business, you had the most money. You know, here lies Guy Berry, who made the most money ever. Here lies Guy Berry, who, you know, was the best CEO ever. Those things just, they don't matter. All this stuff won't matter once we're gone. once you're gone, you're gone. That's it. So then just enjoy the ride and be here in this river of time and know that things are going to be way past us, right?
I love it.
So,
thank you, Guy.
So that's it for today. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope you enjoyed us discussing The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek. If you want to hear more or discuss more books with us, please like, subscribe, and give us comments, ask us questions, and we're happy to answer and respond and give our perspective, whether it's through business or life, on what we learned from the book of The Infinite Game. And there will be more books to come and more discussions, so please join us on those. Thank you.
Thanks for joining the Optimistic American Show. Now help us grow by subscribing to our channel. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave a like and a comment. There is so much more that we have planned. We can't wait for you to embark upon this journey with us.